Services Corporation. Our panel this afternoon is about the importance of relationships in repairing, responding to, and recovering from disasters. The point is this: the full range of response needs to include legal aid, and legal aid needs to be integrated with all of the other service providers dealing with a disaster. We need an integrated team pulling together. Our panel is very well experienced in these issues. I'd like to start by introducing them. To my far left is Paul Furr, who has served as the Chief Executive Officer of Lone Star Legal Aid in Texas, based in Houston, the nation's fourth largest LSC-funded legal aid program. He's been the CEO since 2001. He previously served as Deputy Director and CEO for East Texas Legal Services. To my left is Ellen Joseph, who is Pro Bono Counsel at Vincent & Elkins, based in Houston. She coordinates and manages all of the firm's pro bono activities. She previously worked as a staff attorney at Houston College of Law Legal Clinic. To my immediate right is Will Polk. Will is the Deputy General Counsel in the North Carolina Department of Public Safety and currently serves as in-house counsel for the Division of Emergency Management in North Carolina. He previously served as Deputy General Counsel in the Office of the Governor of North Carolina. And to my far right is George Housen, who has led legal aid of North Carolina since 2002. He is its President and Executive Director. At the beginning of his legal career, after graduating from law school, he was a Peace Corps volunteer in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. He worked as a staff attorney at the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing earlier in his career as well. I'd like to start by setting the stage to talk in big picture terms about what happens after a major disaster, and start with Will and with Paul. Will, in North Carolina, you've experienced a series of significant hurricanes going back to 2016, as I recall. And Paul, Hurricane Harvey was an unbelievable experience in Houston. I'd like to ask each of you, starting with Will, to describe what the impact of the series of hurricanes in North Carolina has been, and Paul, what happened as a result of Harvey.
Thank you, and thank you very much for having me here today. I'm speaking on myself, not speaking on behalf of my agency, but with that being said, as Jim mentioned, since 2016, North Carolina has had significant impacts from three major hurricanes. Hurricanes Matthew in 2016, Hurricane Florence last year, and most recently Hurricane Dorian. And two of those three storms were storms of record for our state, those being Matthew and Florence. And in between all that, we also had several tornadoes in the central part of our state. We also had flooding from various storm systems and the remnants of other storm systems. And so we've had our fair share of natural disasters in our state. As a result of those Florence and Matthew, the state did receive an individual assistance major disaster declaration under the Stafford Act from the President of the United States. And also from the Tropical Storm Michael, we received a public assistance disaster declaration from FEMA, as well as another public assistance declaration request for Dorian. And we also received another Stafford declaration for the tornadoes. So we've had our fair share of our FEMA partners showing up to in our state. As mentioned before, our state was first impacted by Hurricane Matthew in 2016. Just to give you a sense geographically where the storm hit, it was along the corridors of the US 64, which is sort of northeast North Carolina, the I-40 corridor, which basically stretches from Wilmington, North Carolina, up through the central part of our state, the Triangle, heading west to California, of course, and then the I-95 corridor, which basically runs from north to south through our state. So Matthew impacted that entire area from Virginia to South Carolina to pretty much the central part of our state. Much like what happened during our last storm of record, which prior to that was Hurricane Floyd in 1999, which we just celebrated the 20th anniversary of, many areas that were flooded in our state were areas beyond a typical river basin flooding. These were storms that just came in and parked and just stayed for days. Either Matthew as it danced along the coast, or Florence, where it just came up through central North Carolina, where it made landfall off of Wilmington, and it just stayed in this flooded areas that flooded outside the normal typical riverine flooding. There were areas where people did not think would flood. And some of the impacts from that storm with Matthew were over 100,000 structures that were damaged, and estimated at $1.5 billion in financial losses, and was responsible for 25 deaths. Florence was one that, again, as I mentioned, came up through Wilmington and hit the same areas almost 2 years after Matthew did. So the same people that got impacted by Hurricane Florence, Matthew, were also hit again by Hurricane Florence. So they were just getting their lives back together and they get hit by a catastrophic event again. That storm was an estimated $17 billion in damage to our state. So as you can see, between those two storms, these were very catastrophic events to the individuals in our states. And over 50 people died as a result of that storm, either directly from the storm or things that happen indirectly whenever a storm comes through. So the $17 billion was more than Matthew and Floyd combined as far as Hurricane Florence. So Michael thankfully did not have the same impact as far as the people, but it did have an impact on our infrastructure. And Dorian, we just are, as you can probably see from news, people have been impacted in the coastal communities, and we're still doing damage assessments to that storm. So we have made a request for a public assistance disaster request from the president, but we haven't heard whether or not it was granted yet or not. But that's just some of the flavor of some of the things that we dealt with from major events in our state.
Well, the task force report emphasizes that the legal problems that arise from a disaster unfold over a long period of time. There are immediate issues that might be more obvious to people, but other issues that can linger for years. What you describe with a series of storms has to have a compounding effect. Can you say something about the cumulative impact of these storms over time and how it affects disaster response and recovery?
Right. So the cumulative effect of these storms is this area of North Carolina we have our major metro centers in Charlotte and the Triangle, as far as Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, Greensboro Triad. The southeastern part of North Carolina, you have Wilmington, which is a metro area, but then the other areas are pretty rural, and they're agri-based communities. Some of the environmental impacts you see from these storms are from the hog lagoons that sometimes will breach, particularly in 1999 with Floyd. We monitor that very closely, the emergency management, with each major storm that comes through. So those areas are already relatively economically depressed. They're very dependent on agribusiness, so whenever you have these types of storms, it does have a major impact to their daily lives and their livelihoods. And of course, housing is a major issue in that area where there's a real dearth of affordable housing that these individuals who are impacted by the storms can reach out to. And then housing stock. I mean, there's not a great wealth or inventory of housing so that when these storms hit, they have a place where they can go to rent a home or public housing or anything like that. So when these storms hit, housing is a huge impact to those individuals. And because we had two major storms on top of one another, these individuals are still in the process of trying to rebuild their lives through that. And we've had some innovative programs through FEMA this past storm. We had the STEP program that was implemented to help residents after Florence. In Matthew, we had some temporary housing that was provided from FEMA, but a lot of it was just vouchers that were given to individuals frankly, they stayed in hotels and motels for extended months. And so that was a real challenge, and it's an ongoing challenge for our agency and our partner agencies like Legal Aid to be able to respond after these storms. So we were holding our breaths when Dorian was coming through the state because we just been slammed, quite frankly.
Paul, can you describe the impact of Harvey in Houston? Lone Star Legal Aid was itself a victim of that hurricane. Can you describe how your service area was affected and also what the impact was on your organization's operations.
Sure. Yeah, that's good. Harvey caused 103 deaths. That's one metric that we are starting with. There were 41 federally declared disaster counties affecting about 1.8 million eligible clients. Damage to over 200,000 homes, 700,000 automobiles, dumped over 34 trillion gallons of water into the affected areas. Nederland, a little city outside of Beaumont, received 64.5 inches of rain in a 24-hour period, setting a new national record. There were nearly 1 million FEMA applications made after Harvey. Harvey was, once you got to the flood part of it, was what they call a 1,000-year flood. And when you're in the planning business, you hear all the time about 100-year plans. Well, this was a 1,000-year plan. 40 of our staff were moved out of their homes. Not all of them destroyed, but they didn't have a home to go back to. And then we had a second disaster, which was the fire in our main office in downtown Houston. There was an electrical utility vault underneath the street next to our building. A sump pump quit working, and when you go through disasters, I'm told you get more familiar with this. I will never forget it. Blew the transformer up, which blew the transformer in our building up, caught the building on fire, and we were out of that office. We're not back in yet. We hope to be back in February. This would be a good point for me to thank Ellen Joseph, who's next here, and all of the pro bono councils and all the law firms in Houston who really perform yeoman service helping get us back up on our feet. Many of our staff in Houston didn't have a place to go, didn't have an office to go to, so they were quite willing to go stay at the shelters, which for the most part were air conditioned and a much preferable place to be. They'd be glad to see clients in that circumstances, but they had to have computers, paper, telephones, and Ellen and her cohorts from the Houston area pro bono council and the law firms they represented came to our rescue immediately. I also should give a shout out to Latham and Watkins, who gave us a year's pro bono office space, and Wire Woods, who gave us a year's pro bono office space, and finally to the Pillsbury Law Firm, which interestingly enough, if you ever come across this again, has a pro bono program for fire litigation for nonprofits. They did yeoman service in getting things put together so construction can start on our building, and like I say, we're hoping to move in February. Needless to say, I forgot to mention that Governor Abbott estimated that Harvey caused $175 billion worth of damage, which allegedly was hit in the number 2 slot behind Katrina. Harvey's a sort of storm we're going to see more of, where they go up and down the coast and back and forth. They're Category 5 for a while, or Category 4 for a while, and then they drop down, and then they stall and move, and that's where the rain comes from. I'm told that we're going to see more and more of those, or to help us if we see Dorian come across in a different way. We had the Bahamas, in addition to all the serious hardcore flooding which we saw in North Carolina and other parts.
Thank you, Paul. A couple of takeaways there. Responders themselves are often victims of disasters, and they have to have the mechanisms in place to be able to help themselves before they're able to help others. Listen to how many people in Paul's office lost their housing and had to take care of their families immediately. One of the points of the report issued today is the importance of continuity of operations planning, both for legal services providers and for the courts. That they're not going to be able to help others if they're not able to get themselves up and running quickly after a disaster that may have had a devastating effect on their operations. I'd like to turn now to the legal issues that arise after a disaster. It comes as news to a lot of people that there are many legal issues that arise in connection with a disaster. They're not as obvious to people as the physical consequences of a disaster, but they're very real and they have a significant impact on lives, particularly the lives of low-income people. Paul, could you describe the range of legal issues that you've seen in natural disasters, particularly arising after Harvey?
All the legal problems that occur for legal service providers occur in a hurricane. As you might imagine, domestic violence increases when people are crowded together in tight spaces, and that's a big issue and has a real emergency nature to it when it comes up. Applying for FEMA benefits is something that you have to learn to do quickly, efficiently, and you train as many people as you can so that spreads itself around. I think I mentioned earlier there were close to 1 million applications for FEMA help, and all of Harvey. That is a lot of paper. And it helps if that paper is filled out correctly. It helps if somebody's monitoring the denial process. Sometimes you can get things that change something, at least successfully did, most legal aid programs do, in a given area that speed things up accordingly.
Well, could I ask you, could you say something a little more about the FEMA application process? I would have thought that the FEMA application process would be designed to be simple, to be self-executed, that you wouldn't need a lawyer to file a FEMA application. What's the reality?
That's what they say about your IRS tax. I suppose for some people they are simple, but and it's not just that the forms are complicated, it's that folks have different situations, and in order to explain them on paper requires some thought and frequently some additional thought before you can actually submit it. I think FEMA's done a good job of trimming it up, speeding it up, and they certainly listened to us, and we could show them, that it was affecting large numbers of folks. But on the other hand of that, these are not simple matters. If you're going to expend federal monies, they have to be done carefully and properly, and it's a big part of the job, and everyone has to know about it. It's the sort of thing you can train and teach new lawyers or even paralegals an awful lot to help speed up the process, but there's still issues a lawyer that has some experience in this and has to look at. It's a pretty sizable organizational issue to get everybody on the same page with that. Now, FEMA, you consider that to be a federal benefit. It's largely focused on housing and getting folks into housing, or at least getting the ball started on that. But it's worth noting that in a hurricane, be it wind, be it flood, be it whatever it may be, the real issue is the low-income affordable housing is frequently hit the hardest, hit first. And our folks, our clients are the first people out. They usually live in areas that are lower. The buildings are usually substandard. Many times they're real substandard. Sometimes they just haven't been built up to code because they're old. So the logic of all of this is that where poor folks live is generally going to be affected worse than other areas. And that's certainly been our experience in Harvey, Hurricane Ike, and Hurricane Rita. Now, it's worth noting, not everything happened in Houston. We had some of our most serious damage, and the highest percentage of homes that were destroyed over towards the Beaumont, Port Arthur area, the Golden Triangle on the Louisiana border. So you pick up a lot of rural areas in all this, too. It's just so that we have more resources in Houston because so many people are there and pulled together to do it. Emergency shelters, when they first opened up, legal aid programs can have a great impact on behalf of clients simply by being there and being an advocate for doing things in a client-friendly way. Because people get in a hurry, there's a disaster, people are trying to move fast, and sometimes decisions get made that don't work out so well in the practical application, and a legal aid lawyer could be a big help in saying, I'm not going to go sue you, but you're here to be sued, and this law. There's no time to go sue anybody. situations like that, which is worth noting. But the fact is, folks who've been around emergency shelters, and if you do legal aid very long, you're probably going to get that experience, or at least some of them are, can have a real healthy impact on everything simply by being there. Consumer insurance issues, poor people own homes too. In Houston, less than 15% of the population have flood insurance. So, you bend your legal advice to whether or not they have flood insurance or not. And if you have flood insurance in Texas, it's not the easiest claim in the world to make. It's fairly complicated. There's lots of ins and outs to it. There are private lawyers who specialize in that sort of thing, and certainly Harvey, they lent their expertise freely to all of us, and that was really appreciated. Education. A lot of school districts expect for you to get your kids back in school, and they'll file truancy claims against you if they're not. Interestingly enough, federal law prohibits them doing that if they're homeless, which for a lot of our clients, that's exactly a shelter, that sort of thing. But you'd be surprised at how often issues like that would come up. So every sort of legal issue that you can imagine comes up, but it comes up with a real distinct flavor because of the hurricanes.
Thank you, Paul. A few points about relationships there. One, Paul mentioned the importance of relationships with FEMA in trying to resolve the complexity of the application process. FEMA is not the enemy here. The relationship is not going to be productive if it's adversarial. And FEMA has been very responsive to suggestions from legal aid lawyers about how they might be able to improve the process to make it more friendly to people who need their services. Another important relationship with the Red Cross. Paul mentioned having access to shelters and recovery centers. When legal aid lawyers first tried to get access to recovery centers, Red Cross people didn't know really what a legal aid lawyer was. They thought that these were lawyers for pay fishing for clients, looking to make a buck, that they were soliciting business. How would they know otherwise? And they were trying to protect people and wanted to keep them out. Well, through the relationship building process and explaining what the role of legal aid lawyers is, there's now a strong working relationship with the Red Cross, and legal aid lawyers are welcomed to the centers that the Red Cross operates. And finally, the example of home ownership that Paul cited. This was a particular issue after Katrina. A lot of low-income people own homes that have been passed down through the generations, and they don't have deeds. The transmittals over the course of the generations were not documented in a way that gives them something to take to a FEMA office to be able to make a claim. There are ways to remedy that, and retroactively to document the ownership of property. You need a lawyer to do it. George, could you talk about some of the unanticipated legal issues that come up? In legal aid generally, we find that often people who have legal problems don't self-identify their problem as legal. They don't know what remedies are available to them. Could you give some examples of legal help that is available to people that they might not know about, and how legal aid can educate people about that kind of assistance?
Thanks, Jim. Well, I'd like to concur with Paul's observation that it's absolutely essential that legal aid lawyers are in the shelters, in the disaster recovery centers. Recovery starts the minute they survive the storm. And to have a successful recovery, it has to be fast, and it has to start immediately. And you have to realize that, yes, Legal Services Corporation and legal aid organizations work with the poor. This was a disaster. There are a whole cohort of newly poor. Florence wiped out about 45% of the small businesses in 31 counties. Those people who were getting paychecks now are without jobs. Those business owners are now without businesses. They are LSC eligible. They are now our clients. They don't know where to turn. They've never been in this situation before. How does that community recover if we're not there to help them and guide them with staff attorneys and pro bono attorneys who can help them get through those speed bumps? Literacy issues with FEMA. you want an advocate when you're filling out a government form like that. You want to put your best foot forward, and lawyers are known to do that. So we help with that process. That has to be part of the process going forward. Landlords don't know what to do. We approach this, we often represent tenants in eviction matters, but in this disaster, everyone's in the same boat. Landlords, many of whom are blue collar, working, they own their home, they're one mortgage a payment away from being a tenant again themselves. They have a mortgage. Their house is flooded. Do they stop charging rent? What do? They're going to get some FEMA money to remediate the mold and the crud in their apartment. What do they do with the personal belongings of the tenant? Should they just throw them out? Where is the tenant? The tenant could be 2 counties away. Those kinds of questions come up all the time, and we need to be able to tell landlords what their rights, what their obligations are. We need to tell tenants what their rights and obligations are. If we can stabilize them, if they have the knowledge going forward right away, that decreases the psychological first aid that they're going to need, and it's going to improve their options and improve the likelihood that they're going to recover successfully. So it's important that we're there to do that. We train all of our lawyers on what we call trauma-informed advocacy. Our lawyers get psychological first aid, the same first aid training that Red Cross volunteers get. These people are under extreme duress. They don't know what they don't even know. And so lawyers are essential there. For every 10 hours I spend in shelters, disaster recovery centers, giving people information, I'm probably saving between 50 and 70 hours of court time from complications that result if I let things languish. If we can give people information that's going to prevent them from getting involved in litigation down the road, we save dollars. Emergency management, like Will, they get better information, better results. What were the damages? Who's been impacted by this? What are the costs involved here? And we can reduce those costs at the other end as we go down the road here. We're not litigating. We're not spending time in court. We can help with recovery. So those are the kinds of issues that we need, that don't even occur to people right away.
Thank you, George. Critical component of providing legal assistance after a disaster is the private bar, pro bono lawyers. Ellen, can you talk about pro bono legal assistance following a disaster and about the value of relationships there? What kind of relationships you and your firm have had with other law firms? How you mobilized across the legal community to provide help after Harvey?
Hi, I'm thrilled to be here discussing what has now become a favorite topic of mine. While personally, maybe not so much. Harvey was really the third storm in 3 years that hit these same communities pretty hard. We had a tax day flood, then we had the Memorial Day flood, and then we had Harvey. And as has been stated before, that was compounding on similar communities, similar neighborhoods. People were just coming back into their houses from the tax day flood during the Memorial Day flood. And so it was very clear this was going to take a lot of resources, legal and otherwise. And we were very fortunate to have had prior relationships with the legal aid organizations through our pro bono programs. So we had been doing work with Lone Star and Houston Volunteer Lawyers and all of the other groups as a regular practice of our pro bono program. So those relationships were already built. So the day Harvey hit, the night Harvey hit, I got immediate word that Lone Star had caught fire. And immediately I knew how to reach some of the folks at Lone Star because we had been previously in contact about other things. And so there were a couple lawyers and I putting our heads together about how we could help Lone Star lawyers help the community. They already needed to be out in the disaster relief centers. And so we needed to be able to, the first thing we wanted to do was to get them computers so that they could get out in the community and help. And so I'm wearing 2 hats today. I'm the Pro Bono Counsel at Vincent & Elkins, but at the time I was also a board member of the Association of Pro Bono Counsel. So not only was I able to mobilize the Houston community, and V&E has a pretty large presence there, but I had Pro Bono Counsel friends from other states who were reached out and said, what can we do? And we were able to get the Supreme Court to issue that Katrina-like rule where out-of-state lawyers can help. And so we had one program going of trying to train and mobilize lawyers from all over the country to take these cases once they became available. At the same time, we were coordinating getting computers, cell phones, printers, scanners for the Lone Star legal aid lawyers who were out in the community helping. Another sort of interesting thing we did, our offices were closed for a couple days. I had several families living in my house. It was kind of a crazy time. One of the first things Lone Star asked us was, could you make copies of all of these Know Your Rights materials that we're going to distribute to the disaster relief centers? And I thought, and I had partners and associates reaching out, what can we do? What can we do? And I said, well, if you're here, I'm running every copy machine on the 26th and 27th floor because our graphics teams were dealing with their own work. So I think we provided 25,000 copies of Know Your Rights tenant things, Know Your Rights landlords, FEMA tips in a million languages. Houston is the most diverse city in the country. So we wanted to make sure we were able to reach everyone. And then pretty close to right away, we set up a system with Houston Volunteer Lawyers where we could send a link out to the Houston bar and say, what shift do you want to come to the George R. Brown Convention Center and stand at the legal aid table and learn how to be a legal aid lawyer from the folks that were there? And so we had a previous system we used during the travel ban where we had shifts of lawyers going to the airport, and we just changed the name of the shift link and we switched it to Harvey. And so we had lawyers signing up for half day and full day where they would just go to the convention centers and stand at the table and be instructed by the legal aid lawyers on what to do. After sort of the initial emergency, we realized what the legal needs were going to be. There was going to be a tremendous amount of landlord-tenant issue, housing issues, FEMA issues. So we started to train as many lawyers as we could on what we anticipated the problem being. So, and not just at Vincent Elkins, but through ABCO, we were able to send out training videos that Legal Aid had produced so that people were at the ready. And I think one of the things that we learned so well is it would have been really great to have an annual training on disaster relief so that when these storms hit and they are coming all the time, the lawyers are already trained. So we already have lawyers that have been trained, but I would love, one of my goals is to make it a part of our regular curriculum at V&E, FEMA training, some landlord-tenant issues, some benefit issues, because we really see that a lot and we are able to help a lot of people. One of the things that I'm proudest of that we have done, as we've heard, these disasters do last a long time. The legal needs change over time. What people need might change, but victims of these disasters are still victims a year and 2 years later. And so we created with a legal services organization clinics, virtual clinics we could do for Harvey victims. And so and it was well a year. I think we actually launched it 1 year following the storm. So people were calling in with issues, I paid to have this remediated and nobody came. I was supposed to get this benefit and I didn't get it. I got an incorrect benefit. I'm getting incorrect advice from the insurance company. And so the issues are different a year and 2 years later, but it is important that we now sort of know what they're going to be, that we keep lawyers trained at the ready. And that is where the relationships come about because we're not experts in this. If there were, some sort of energy merger, we could train all of you lawyers. But we rely on the legal aid lawyers to train our lawyers. And so those relationships are so important to have all the time, not just in an emergency. When legal aid caught fire and I wanted to help, if I didn't know Paul's staff, who to call, how to reach them, if I didn't know that before the storm, I certainly wasn't going to be able to find them during the storm. And so it's really important. We all have these wonderful groups that we can rely on. The Association of Pro Bono Counsel is a bunch of people like me. There are several of us in the room. We can get the word quickly out to the private bar. We are hopeful that more states will issue that Katrina rule. We struggled. We had all these lawyers after Harvey that were all trained, and when Maria hit, we had all these lawyers that wanted to help in Florida, and we could not. So it's something to think about. That is a real issue. We had FEMA very well-trained lawyers that couldn't help in Florida. They could help. There are other states that would let us. So I think working together often and staying in touch with each other often and finding out what those needs are is the way we can really contribute the most after the disaster.
Thank you, Ellen. I'd like to wrap up by asking the three panelists who were members of the task force to pick your favorite recommendation. You get one. You got to do it quickly. Explain what your favorite recommendation is and why. I'll start with you, Paul.
Well, picking up on Ellen's comment, I put down train. Recommendation A5, providing training on how to identify disaster-related civil legal issues. And recommendation B4, training often. If I had to take away from the disaster report, it would be that, and we're going to talk.
Ellen?
Well, it was very difficult. It's like picking a favorite child, I think. But deploying pro bono attorneys is an incredible resource, and there are so many lawyers. There are so many lawyers, and if we could get a percentage of them deployed. So I have found that there are very few, I call them no bonos in the world, very few lawyers that don't want to help at all with anything ever. Most people want to help. They are nervous. They don't know how to help. They don't know exactly what they could do. I'm an M&A lawyer. What could I do? And so my job as pro bono counsel is to give them the training and the confidence that they can help, because I think the desire to help is there. So I picked recommendation A7 and how to deploy those volunteers.
And Will, what's your favorite?
My favorite is building relationships on sunny sky
Yep.
days. That's just super critical because the cycle of emergency management, from mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery, they're all interdependent. And so it's very critical to make these relationships in sunny sky situations, so that when the situation comes up, like I had during Dorian, where we had a situation where people were having difficulty to getting out of a situation. The relationships that we built, not only during the storm, but also just built on that relationship in sunny sky, I was able to pick up the phone, get resources, find stakeholders and allies to help get those people out. So that's really critical for me, is those relationships, because the other thing that came out loud and clear in this session today is that not only does the disaster create new legal issues, but people have pre-existing legal issues before the disaster hits. And so whether it's, I try to take the approach of all hazards, not just hurricanes. I think wildfires and all these other crazy scenarios, cyber, whatever. But, having those relationships helps those individuals not only deal with the new legal issues that comes up because of the storm, but the pre-existing legal issues that they may have had as far as family law, landlord-tenant, healthcare issues, whatever, income inequality, whatever the issue is, those relationships are just very critical to having successful outcomes for disaster survivors.
I add just one thing. One of the things that we came across that you guys will see is that people don't have their documents in a storm. So that, people don't have proof. I mean, even if they have clear title, they don't have anything anymore. So one of the things that we're trying to do in our regular pro bono program is to talk to people like I used to do. I was a domestic violence lawyer. I used to talk to people at safety planning with every client, every person, every time I met them. Now we're talking to them about disaster preparedness. Do you have copies of all your kids' birth certificates and your title in a place that's safe? Because what would happen was, it's not sometimes they weren't entitled to benefits, but they couldn't prove them up. So I would advise in sunny skies to be advising all legal aid clients and all pro bono clients to make sure that they're as ready as they can be. That's my advice from these storms.
Thank you. We have a lot of experience and wisdom here. Thank you all for sharing it. Would you please join me in